Let's jump right in. We often look at history as just a bunch of isolated events, firmly stuck in the past. But in this explainer, we're going to trace an undeniable sweeping thread. We'll be connecting 19th century imperial ambitions, those sparkling diamond rings sold around the world today, and the incredibly complex, heated debates over land ownership happening right now in South Africa.
We've got a ton of fascinating historical ground to cover today. So here's our roadmap. We'll start with Rhodes' imperial vision, move into the diamond monopoly, look at the concessions, raids, and violence, unpack the legacy of dispossession, and finally, end with reckoning with the past.
Okay, Section 1, Rhodes' Imperial Vision. To really understand the massive shadows Cecil Rhodes cast, we first have to understand exactly what he was trying to achieve.
Take a look at his 1877 Confession of Faith. It reveals a chillingly vast desire to bring literally the entire world under British control. Drafted when he was just a young man with a relatively small estate, his vision was frankly staggering. He didn't just want to colonize parts of Africa. He explicitly wrote about forming a secret society to expand British rule into South America, the Middle East, the seaboards of China and Japan, and, get this, even the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of the British Empire. It was an extensive, almost unbelievable fantasy of global domination.
Now, to make that wild imperial dream a reality, he realized he needed cash, unprecedented financial power. He leveraged an astoundingly effective combination of immense personal wealth and shrewd political instincts, what was often called the imperial factor, to collaborate with the British government and lock down territories. He'd befriend local British commissioners, organize protectorates, and seamlessly merge capital investment with aggressive imperial expansion. Basically, the money funded the empire, and the empire secured more money.
Section 2, the diamond monopoly. Because to fund this incredible vision, Rhodes needed capital, which brings us to the creation of the ultimate corporate monopoly. Backed by the Rothschild family, Rhodes just started buying up smaller operations in the diamond fields of South Africa, eventually launching De Beers Consolidated Mines in 1888. By systematically buying out his competitors, including his main rival Barney Barnatto, Rhodes achieved near complete dominance over the world's diamond supply. We're talking a staggering 90% of global production. But here's the kicker. Rhodes didn't just want to mine diamonds. He explicitly ensured the De Beers trust deed allowed the company to build railways, run banks, annex land, and even raise its own armed forces. It was an empire in itself.
Here is the open secret of the industry. Diamonds aren't actually that scarce. So De Beers had to manufacture a notion of scarcity to keep prices artificially high. Through their central selling organization, they convinced independent producers to sell exclusively through them. And what if a producer rebelled? Well, like we saw historically with operations in Zaire or independent dealers in Israel, De Beers would aggressively flood the market with similar diamonds to absolutely crash prices and punish the defiant rivals. Or, on the flip side, they'd just stockpile excess diamonds in massive vaults to artificially choke global supply. And this brilliantly illustrates the geopolitical stakes even decades later. This 2006 meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and De Beers chairman Nicky Oppenheimer, that happened because massive diamond reserves were discovered in Siberia back in the 1950s. De Beers constantly had to negotiate with major outside producers, like Russia, to prevent them from flooding the market and destroying the entire cartel. They basically had to guarantee the purchase of vast quantities of Russian diamonds just to keep them safely inside their tightly controlled distribution network.
Let's move on to Section 3, concessions, raids, and violence. Let's see how this massive corporate wealth physically expanded across the African continent. Before Rhodes could push north, he needed legal cover to present to the British government. So he sent a team led by Charles Rudd to negotiate with King Lobengula of the Mandebele. Rhodes used this deliberately misrepresented concession to secure a royal charter from Britain. This effectively gave his corporate entity, the British South Africa Company, the terrifying power to annex and govern land on Britain's behalf. Now, Lobengula later tried desperately to disavow the document, insisting the terms were entirely misrepresented to him, but it was too late. The legal foundation for corporate empire was already laid.
And his ambition absolutely didn't stop there. He also wanted control of the incredibly lucrative gold fields in the neighboring Boer Republic of the Transvaal. So Rhodes sponsored the disastrous Jameson Raid in 1895. It was this botched 500-man invasion meant to trigger an uprising of British expatriates and overthrow the Boer government. The raid was a spectacular failure. It humiliated the British government, forced Rhodes to resign as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, and directly fueled the devastating Second Boer War just a few years later.
We really must recognize the stark contrast here between modern public relations and historical reality. Back in 1947, a copywriter coined the legendary phrase, "A diamond is forever," cementing the gem as the ultimate symbol of eternal romance and love. Yet the reality of how those diamond fields were actually secured involved devastating colonial warfare. The expansion into these territories utilized scorched earth tactics, forced labor, and the deliberate destruction of indigenous livelihoods, all to secure those very gems and the land beneath them.
This brings us to Section 4, the legacy of this possession. All of this corporate and imperial conquest laid the groundwork for an unprecedented system of land theft.
What followed was a rapid, brutal succession of racist land laws that systematically squeezed the African majority into ever-shrinking, degraded reserves. It started with Rhodes's own 1894 Glenn Gray Act, which essentially used taxes to force African men off their own land and into cheap labor for the mines. Then you have the devastating 1913 Natives Land Act, which confined the African majority to just 7% of the land. Laws like the Group Areas Act further segregated populations, culminating in a system where the vast majority of the population was legally barred from owning property in 87% of their own country.
To put that into perspective, the data from the 2017 South African land audit is absolutely staggering. Even decades after the end of apartheid, the structural legacy remains deeply, deeply entrenched. As of that audit, individuals, companies, and trusts owned 90% of the private land. And within that individual ownership, white South Africans held 72% of the land, compared to just 4% for African owners. This isn't just distant history, it is a live mathematical reality of wealth and resource distribution today.
Section 5, Reckoning with the Past. This brings us squarely into the present day, where modern society is grappling with this heavy inheritance. You've probably heard of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, which started at the University of Cape Town, but it's crucial to understand that this movement emerged not just to remove statues of a controversial guy. It aims to challenge the unwitting institutional racism that still structurally embeds unequal access to opportunity today. The core argument is that honoring figures like Rhodes normalizes a deeply skewed system, a system that still dictates who has access to wealth, to education, and to land, essentially making the colonial order a present-day reality rather than a bygone era.
So impartially speaking, how is South Africa attempting to fix this structural inequality? Well, it's a huge debate. While Section 25 of the Constitution mandates land reform and redistribution, progress through the state purchasing land from willing sellers has been incredibly slow, transferring only about 9% of land back to black owners. This frustration has prompted political parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF, to push for land expropriation without compensation as an urgent mechanism to redistribute wealth. They argue that traditional frameworks merely protect the rights of the initial dispossessors. It is a highly complex, deeply contested issue with massive economic and social implications.
As we look at the enduring shadow of Cecil Rhodes, from the diamond rings on our fingers to the intensely debated land policies shaping South Africa today, we have to ask ourselves, how can modern societies structurally reverse centuries of systematic dispossession? Can a legacy built on such profound inequality ever be truly, fully dismantled? Or does the shadow of the empire still dictate the terms of the future? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you, and I'll catch you next time.